This episode's dropping Thursday morning, as we normally do, and by that time, as we record here on Sunday, we're going to know some stuff we don't know right now.
Oh, the winter meetings will be well underway, and we'll have it. And I think, not even, besides that, we'll have a pretty good idea, I think, with the Hall of Fame voting that's starting to go on. I think we'll start having a clearer picture by Thursday of where it might be going.
Well, what you have is the Contemporary Era Committee, which you've already talked about, is going to announce their candidates, their winners and who got in. And the guys we talked about, were Piniella and Gaston and Jim Leland and Davey Johnson, Bill White, Joe West, Ed Montague, and Hank Peters. So I think there's a general thought that, a couple of guys are going to get in, but because it's only a 16-person committee, you really don't know. They got to get 12 of the 16 votes.
Right. I got to think only 2 of them at most is getting in.
And as we talked about in our podcast, there are 2 umpires on there. And I read something by baseball and MLB historian John Thorne, and he feels the way that I do, which I was happy to see, which is, I don't know what the big deal is about all these umpires in the Hall of Fame. Do we really need umpires in that minute? Like really? The best umpires are the ones we don't notice. He basically wrote what I said, and I'm like, okay, so I'm not the only one that feels this way.
Good.
And the Ford Frick Award will be announced at the end of the winter meetings, and that's, I think, on Thursday or something.
And that's
like
a broadcaster award?
Right, that's a broadcaster award. So, and we're very stoked because our own Gary Cohen from here in New York with the Mets is up for the award.
But this is just like an award that they give out, like a MVP essentially.
You're voted.
Okay,
you're voted, and so Joe Buck, who's been doing baseball a lot longer than I thought, 25 years. His dad obviously was the baseball guy, and he's now a football guy and a baseball guy and an everything guy. Joe Castiglione of the Red Sox, who's been there forever. Jacques Doucette, I mentioned the Montreal guy who coined some phrases. That's the guy. Tom Hamilton, longtime play-by-play. Ernie Johnson Sr., who has been around for a while. Ken Korach of Oakland, Mike Krukow, and Dwayne Kuiper of San Francisco. And that's a weird thing because they're boothmate partners for the Giants.
Right.
And chances are, if you're going to get in, only one of them is going to get in. And if one of them gets in,
if you win this, you're in the Hall of Fame?
Yes, in the Ford Frick Award. Right.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
And Dan Schulman, the Toronto guy and Major League Baseball guy, is another guy who's up for the award.
Be cool if Gary won.
All these guys are really viable. So
with only one of them getting it?
I don't know how they do that. I guess it's the same thing. You have to get a certain amount of votes from the 16 voters. You need 12, I guess, to be named. So that's going to be tough with that group on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of deserving vote getters there.
And a lot of the Giant fans are like, well, if one goes in, the other guy shouldn't go in because I only want to go in with my partner or something like that. And I kind of like that whole thing.
No, I want to go in with him.
That got going on. So this week, I got to vote for the Hall of Fame.
Somebody's special.
Yeah, I'm so special. Well, actually, as an IBWAA, that's Internet Baseball Writers Association, the organization.
I thought it was international.
No. And so it's everybody in that. Collectively, everybody votes. And then they get to put in one ballot.
Based on the percentages.
on how many guys we voted. So I sort of kind of have a vote. What I liked about what they did is they allow you to pick 12 guys. And the regular ballot, you only can pick 10. And we've railed on this podcast for a while about guys that pick 4 or 6 or something like that. I don't know. If you're going to have guys stay on the ballot, unless you really don't think he's a Hall of Famer, obviously don't vote for him. But there's a lot of guys on this ballot. And I picked 12, and it came down to there were 3 Phillies and 1 Met that I put for 3 spots. So 4 guys for 3 spots. I mean, I as I always do, I picked Sheffield and Ramirez and all.
You picked all the steroid guys.
All these sinful 7, as I wrote in my recent article, guys, or sinful guys. And I picked Helton, and I picked Adrian Beltre, and all that kind of stuff. And Joe Mauer, I picked him as well. So I thought, well, who do I? So I really want David Wright to stay on the ballot.
David Wright, Chase Utley, Jimmy
Rollins, and Bobby Abreu. Now, none of them are in their last year of eligibility. This is important.
No.
So, and I've come around on Abreu a little bit. I think I keep rating him higher and higher over time.
He of that group is probably the one that's most deserving.
I kind of agree. And so I kind of went back on it, and I kicked out Rollins, and I put in David Wright, and against my frustrating better judgment, I left Chase Utley in there.
But I feel like if you're going to say Chase Utley is a Hall of Famer, it makes it a lot easier to say David Wright is a Hall of Famer.
Now, Jimmy Rollins had a MVP season, and he has some all-time shortstop stats, hitting and fielding.
Unfortunately for him, when he played shortstop, there were guys.
A lot of good shortstops.
That's
an excellent point. I think that he probably does suffer from that.
Utley doesn't suffer from that. If anything, he benefits in that there were not great second basemen playing when he was playing, and he was probably the best.
Do you think that do I make too much of B WAR when you think about that? Utley has a 65 B WAR and Rollins has 44, and that was kind of, if I had to treat them equally, that almost was enough for me to say.
Well, if anything, that just speaks to what we were just saying. That Rollins was not that much better than his peers in the same way that Utley was better in comparison to his peers at the same position.
I think that's an excellent point, and it's not that I don't like Jimmy Rollins, and I think
I just think
there are other guys in the Hall of Fame
right.
that shouldn't be there in some respect because I think would be better.
I think Utley's problem is that the Hall of Fame is generally like, were you the best player at your position in a given era? Rollins might be the fourth or the fifth best shortstop from that era.
A lot of those guys were in the American League. It was the problem at the time, right?
So
they were not that many in the National
playing
League
against them, but still, what league you're playing in doesn't matter for the Hall of Fame. Whereas, can you think of any second basemen that were better than Chase Utley from that time period?
Not contemporarily.
Not really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that makes sense.
So and a lot of things. This led me when we started this thing. We started talking about all the hiring of bench coaches. You and I were just having a conversation, and so it made me think about, okay, so bench coaches, like,
what do they do?
I don't remember there being bench coaches when I was a kid, which is a long time.
Well, they
ago.
definitely existed. I think
so come to find that they really didn't get. They do go back in part because I think Christy Mathewson was supposedly used in that fashion.
They also
not
different
called that.
things.
Right. But it wasn't until Ted Williams took the helm in 1969 of the then Washington Senators, and so Ted Williams never managed anywhere anyway. And it's one of those things when you put a guy who's a great player and you make him manage the team. It's like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird trying to coach basketball.
Really work.
But just do it this way, and you'll be amazing. And like no, you're Larry Bird, you're Magic Johnson, you're Ted Williams. I can't be that amazing because you're that amazing.
That's why you're the guy.
Right. So he wanted a bench coach in there to help him with strategy and stuff like that because he hadn't been a manager. And so a lot of people feel that was kind of where it started, but it wasn't like they were regular bench coaches.
Now, and what does a bench coach exactly do?
And I put this out recently. Aside from not being sure, I think of him like the way I think of the Billy Crystal character in Analyze This. The Robert De Niro movie where he's a mobster and Billy Crystal is the psychoanalyst, and so he was his consigliere. He would just consult with him, and that's what the bench coach is. He's the guy there saying, as Brad Osmus was talking about, he just got hired by Aaron Boone. He goes, so I know Aaron Boone a little bit, and so the way I look at other managers is he doing something I think is strange. That's how I evaluate other managers. And I never saw Aaron Boone do something that I thought, I wonder why he's doing that. Am I missing? And that's what I would ask my bench coach about, going, am I not seeing something that he's doing?
Or is he being like, why are you doing that?
Right. And so he goes, so I never saw Aaron Boone do that, so I was happy to go work for him because obviously in his mind.
Clearly he's got it put together.
I feel so they didn't really come about until I guess the Times used an article in 1989 where they called a bench coach. But I think even beyond that, it wasn't really that big a deal.
I think it's become a bigger deal as teams have had more international players, in having a bench coach that spoke the same language as maybe anywhere from a third to a half of your team, especially when a lot of managers didn't speak any Spanish, probably became a lot more valuable and important.
That's a great point. I think it's a requisite. If you want to be in baseball, if you want to work in baseball, you better speak Spanish.
Or have somebody on your staff that does.
Better if you do it.
Better if you do it, right.
So, yeah, I think that's very true. And so...
and I also think you're seeing a rise in bench coaches because it's a way to keep guys in the game. You're seeing more and more baseball players that have grown up in a system where all they've done is basically play baseball year-round from the age of, 10 until they're 40 and they finally retire. Staying on, being a coach, having all of these extra coaches, positional coaches, hitting coaches, is just a way to keep some of these guys employed and part of baseball.
And so, coming up, when I was a kid watching baseball, the third base coach was kind of like the most important coach outside of the manager. Mm-hmm. Like if the manager got thrown out of the game, a lot of time the third base coach would become the manager. So, okay.
They would have those were the three coaches.
Right, the first base coach. Then you had a pitching coach. You probably had a bullpen. Yeah, I know you had a bullpen coach because they were all the way down there. You had to have somebody keeping company.
And just keeping control of them.
But you didn't have, maybe you didn't really have a hitting coach.
You didn't have support staff.
You didn't have an assistant hitting coach, which the teams have now. Now they're
nutritionists.
You have nutritionists. You have base running coaches. Mm-hmm. You have fielding coaches. And sometimes, like Joey Joey Cora for the Mets this year, he functioned as both the infield coach and the third base coach. So, I don't know if he got more money for that, but, he was doing double duty.
Well, now he's not with the Mets at all.
So, and you could have a catching coach, and then you have it's got to be pretty crowded in there by now, right? Because it's a lot of people who aren't playing or
Plus,
there.
then you probably have a sports psychotherapist employed by all the teams.
I don't know if he's in there during the game or she's in there during the game.
But they're
by the
definitely
way.
there at the facility.
Yes. So there's all these people around the team that have jobs, to your point, and it keeps players connected to the game because the guys that are on the coaching staff and the not guys that are on the coaching staff, they are not part of the Major League Baseball Players Association. So whenever there's a labor problem like there was last year and stuff like that, all of a sudden the guys who are supposed to be putting their arms around the players and nurturing them like that, they're management.
Right, it's not quite the same.
Can't talk to you now. I'm management.
Right, yeah. You're just like, oh, we don't look at you.
You're the bad guys now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't talk to you, manager, whoever. Because you're on the other side and we're the players and you're the bad
Time
guys.
to separate.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of weird. And there's no pension plan for these guys or anything like that. So they basically, the fact that there's more jobs being created out of the salary cap. Right, so none of the coaching staff, things come off the salary cap. So if you're going to spend, I don't know, what did Council get? $4 million a year. I think that's the most ever for a manager.
I thought it was 8.
Oh, you're right. It was 8. So maybe that's the only team where the Cubs could be spending $10 million on
their staff,
coaches and managers, because I don't think too many people are getting paid $500,000 to be a batting coach or something like that.
They're being paid decent though,
but not that much. So let's say I had $10 million in my head as sort of like, wow, that's, and if you're going to spend 280, 300 million on your team.
What's another 10?
What's $10 million? Particularly when it doesn't count against the salary cap.
Right.
So
that's just the cost of doing business.
I think that's why, as you say, bench coaches. But the added importance of these bench coaches seems to me to be something that I didn't like. Like, it's really important to have this guy there more than it was 20 years ago.
Well, it's like the same way about this. It's like, do you really think that they're talking about special things at the winter meetings?
No. Well,
because what I mean by that is that
special things.
The special things, right? It's not anything special. Like we just add importance to it. So now that we needed to talk to something, and now that we know and we have the ability to report so much more on baseball, and we have to have content talking about baseball on the daily. Well, we need to add people into the narrative. The bench coach gets added into the narrative, and now he's talked about. Like the average fan can really, quantify his contribution to the team, when in reality we can't. He's just another coach on the team. But we need to talk about it the same way we all are going to act like something special is happening at the winter meetings, other than it just being a convenient way to thrust baseball back into the main sports narrative. The same way that, what all they're going to be doing this week? Talking about where Shohei Ohtani is going to sign.
And that's probably the biggest thing that will maybe come out of this week.
Right.
I think it will. And it seems like, there's always like a deal or two or a couple of deals that are talked about. Maybe they happen, maybe they don't. Last year we had the whole Carlos Correa thing going on, and so that keeps people talking about baseball at a time when we're not talking about baseball.
In the same way, you need to, you're the MLB Network. You have to fill 24 hours of content in season. Screw it. We'll talk about the bench coach for some team for a little while. Maybe that's something we can spend 15 minutes on.
But it's not like these. I keep thinking about the deals, right? We have to have the deals on that. Maybe we'll hear today on Sunday about Shohei signing with a team that'll allow other things to happen,
right?
Because he signs and other free agents maybe can get signed over the next whatever period. But it's not like these folks aren't in touch when they're not at the winter meetings. So to think that the only reason it's happening is because we're coming together for the winter meetings, we're going to make a deal, is a smokescreen for let's just talk about baseball.
Talk about baseball because obviously the winter meetings now, and we're expecting a whole bunch of dominoes, and then that also allows us to start forecasting what we think is going to happen next season. Because if all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a second, the Mets have signed Yamamoto and Jordan Montgomery, but the Cubs have added Ohtani. The Dodgers didn't really seem to go at anybody. What's that mean for the NL West? Are the Diamondbacks going to be on top? Boom, you've got a whole bunch of content just to farm out of that you can last you. Because we're 100 days until
a little over 100 days before the first game.
Before the first game.
The first game between the Dodgers and the Pirates on March 20th, 2024 in South Korea. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we kind of look out on the horizon and say, wow, we're going to have games that count in a little over 100 days. That's amazing.
Right, so baseball will be back sooner than you think.
Right.
So you don't have to get that far. So a little bit of baseball news now with the winter meetings gets you through to the new year. And then you pretty much just have to vamp through January And then boom, it's February and spring training is coming.
Right, and so the winter meetings have been around for a long time, and I think they started officially in 1901. And they had them before that a couple of times. People would get together, but that was the first year of the American League. And then I looked in I think it was Baseball Reference or Wikipedia, but they don't really report that the first winter meeting happened until 1926 in terms of its location. So I don't know what they did those first 25 years, where it was or what happened, but they said it was an annual event starting in 1901. And I can just imagine what like a 1940 winter meetings was, hey Jim, how did you get in? How's the train?
Definitely a boys' club.
Yes, and cigars and maybe even alcohol could have been involved.
Just a bit of it.
So I think it's not that anymore. Although I do think there's a camaraderie there. And I heard it said this week a number of times, going, if you can get to the winter meetings, and we have Kelly. Kelly's down there this week. As a fan, you can. It was suggested you can be there. You'll see people. You run into people, and
it just seems so strange to me. Like, what? I'm gonna go walk around and go be like, oh, there's.
Look, there, is it Shohei isn't walking around there, by the way.
It's Billy Epler. Oh my God. It's David Stearns. Ooh.
So if if you were invited to the winter meetings and you got to go to panel discussions and things like that, I think
maybe
it would be interesting. There's 300 vendors that show up, so they sell all kinds of stuff to the teams and to the people that are there. And even though it's an MLB thing, I think people from all of baseball sort of use this, and it's great for Nashville.
Oh
right?
yeah.
In the middle, in December, they got all these people coming in.
Something to talk
baseball.
about.
And Nashville is a candidate for expansion.
Oh yeah, they are.
Let me think about that for a second.
Let's lobby all those team owners.
So does that
every
mean
time
that
they come in.
the winter meetings will be in Portland next year, or it could be?
It could be.
Yeah, so I think they don't mean very much other than it gives us great stuff to talk about.
Right, and obviously with the biggest dominoes yet to fall, it's difficult to forecast free agency too much because so much of the money is going to be tied up until Ohtani goes and Yamamoto goes. I think once those two guys go, you're going to see a lot of deals happen very quickly.
Yeah, and right, because teams are slotting right now. They're trying to figure out how far do we have to go, because there's kind of been overpayment in some respects for some of these early pitchers that went off the board. So you're worried that that's the way that it's going to be. Like all of a sudden you're going to have to pay way too much.
Right, but you're also thinking that part of those teams overpaid to get a guy locked in at this time.
I'm trying to see. So they don't. Last year, the winter meetings were in San Diego, so that had nothing to do. I don't see Portland on this list at all. So it would be really interesting.
If they change it all of a sudden and Portland comes out of nowhere.
Or Charlotte, right? That's another place they're talking about expansion. So and I don't think it'll be in Oakland, though.
No.
So anyway, we will have much to talk about after this week, I guess. In next week's podcast, we'll kind of do a recap.
We'll be able to kind of start digging into the winter meetings with some of the bigger signings that we're seeing. And obviously, if anybody out there wants to reach out to us about the signings you're excited about or are hoping to see your team come through, we love hearing from you. Thank you for listening, for reaching out and communicating us. We love hearing from you.
Yeah. And if you have any idea of where the winter meetings were from 1902 to 1925, because I couldn't find anything on where those meetings were, like in somebody's garage or something, and I have no idea. So they said it was annual, and they didn't. They have a list. You can find a list for every year after that, and it's been in New York a lot of the times and all that stuff. So, but maybe it'll be in Portland next year, but we won't be going.